Hey everyone, welcome to the Worship Artistry Podcast. My name is Jason Houtsma, and with me
is Christina Kaslanka.
How are you doing, Christina?
I am doing splendidly.
Oh, that's good for you.
How are you, Jason? What have you been up to recently?
No, there's good in there. No, I have like kind of crazy eyes right now because I've been trying to get about 3 months ahead on shooting song lessons.
Crazy.
Because we get to move out of our house for a little while, so that a bunch of housework.
Which is where Jason's studio is.
Yeah, my teaching video studio is there, and so I won't be able to have access to it because we're having some work done, and it's a little intimidating.
Yep.
But there's something about, the way that this job works normally is it's like, okay, I've got a song this week, and then I teach the song, and then I'm creating other content around the song, but then also we're creating YouTube videos, and we're working in the office, and we're handling issues and all those kind of things. And to be able to just like hunker down and just be like, I'm doing a song today, I'm doing another song today, I'm doing another song today. There's a certain there's a certain kind of rhythm to that starts to kick in, and you're like, okay, now, it takes me back to when I started Worship Artistry, because that's all I was doing. Like, I just went in a moving blanket fort and shot videos for hours and hours on end. And so it's kind of coming back around. It's like, okay, I know how to do this, and we've got some good songs coming up. So
yeah,
it's
that's exciting. And I've just been all by myself, not creating lessons, sitting in the office.
Barely.
Actually at home.
I was going to say,
I haven't been in the office.
You've been working from home, but I'm glad it feels like an office to you. That's good for your productivity.
Yes, it's been lovely.
My wife and I are basically, she put out the call like, hey, we have no place to live for like 2 months.
Who can house us?
Does anybody want a house sitter?
Yeah.
And we actually, it's actually a really cool like answer to prayer. Like, because the prayer was not only we don't want to just like move into somebody's house, hey, thanks for putting us up, but it'd be great if this actually worked out well for you. And so my wife put that out there, and within like 2 days, we had 2 months booked.
That's amazing.
Mostly of people that were like, perfect, I need somebody to take care of my animals, and I'm going to be gone for a couple weeks. But anyway, we're going to be staying at a lake house, which is, going to suffer at a lake house for 3 days. And I was like, I'm just not going to come into
the Lord.
not going to come into the office. That's like almost an hour away. That's just too far, And I'm like, oh, Christina drives that like all the time.
Yep. And then and I complain and no one understands. And now you'll understand.
But
that's such a beautiful picture of community.
Right.
Like coming around
amazing.
you guys.
I will say, I talk a lot about how I'm part of a small church. And I will say that we are very bad at some things. Like if you want a program, if you want something that's like, you want to come and sit and just watch and like, just kind of take it all in. We are bad at that. We are terrible at that. What we are great at is community and rallying around people. And it's like, I've had so many moments for us, and just even recently with friends that are going through things where you're just like, gosh, this is church, man.
Yeah.
Like these people are showing up for all these people in just the most beautiful, natural way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I feel like it's cool to be on the receiving end of that a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, wow, we have an incredible community.
Recently, I've been really aware of something really similar where I've been spending a lot of time with a few members from my church, just around my age. We're doing ministry, we're in worship together, we're doing all these different things together. And it's been beautiful to watch like the history we have with each other as friends, of growing up together, of now being adults together, but then also our history in ministry, like in the presence of God together, of like what we've experienced. And still to this day, where one day we'll be leading worship somewhere, and then the next day we're playing like pickleball or something,
Oh, you're pickleballers. Okay.
Oh, we're pickleballers. And it's so fun to have that relationship with people of like, this is truly like church. This is doing life with each other, like all across the board, just doing all the things together.
Well, let me ask you about that.
Yes.
Because I came into I'm in a bunch of different worship leader groups, and somebody on Facebook had asked a question, and they were essentially saying like that they had been a part of their church community for a long time. They'd been on the worship team for a long time. They needed to step away for a little bit, and they just felt like, oh, nobody cared that I was gone. Nobody reached like that feeling of like, oh, I feel like I'm plugged in here, but now I don't really feel like I am, and like dealing with some hurt around that. I'm curious how in your world, like how has that played out? Like how have you connected beyond just, oh, we're on the worship team together? No, we're also living life together.
Yeah, it is very intentional. You have to be incredibly intentional with it.
And when you say you, who are you talking about?
Myself.
Right.
Like, it is up to me to be intentional to, like, if I've recognized a relationship that I want, or this is just me, I'm driven with just intimate relationships. Like, I love having relationships with people. So I know that if I've met someone new, I cherish us being able to go deeper than what we have going on currently. And so I will be the one to initiate a hangout. I will be the one to initiate going out to have coffee, to go have dinner, to do something. Like, it'll be one-sided for a while until it's recognized on the other end. Like, that's been my experience. And sometimes it's not recognized. And that's where it's sad, where you kind of have to make that decision of, am I still willing to put in the effort and it being one-sided, or am I going to let this go? Like, and that's okay. Like, sometimes not all friendships, not all relationships are going to work out, and you just kind of have to be okay with that, and process that internally and cry. Just sometimes. But I think it really is just your intentionality. It's the decision that you make. Are you willing to be the one to host maybe for the first several hangouts? Are you willing to be the one that hosts all of the hangouts before maybe someone initiates it?
I know, it's interesting because I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Like, and it's easy when you're kind of a natural initiator, you know? Like, I remember when I first moved here, you know, it was just, I was looking to, I'm like, I got to meet people. So I'm just going to assume that everybody wants to get to know me because I'm so great. And I'm just going to invite them out to stuff. Well, you almost kind of have to, like, pump yourself up a little bit, right?
You really do.
Because there's this, if you have insecurity around, like, oh, well, like I'm watching it right now. You know, my kids are in high school, right? And so they're navigating this world, and you're like, just assume everybody likes you and just go do that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But you remember, like, then you remember, like, that's so hard.
Yeah.
You know? And especially I think in a church scenario, like, if you have a lot of history at a church per se, right? It's almost like your home court, right? So it's very easy. Like, it's very easy for me to walk up to anyone at Mosaic and just be like, "Hi, I'm Jason. Tell me about you."
Yeah. Yeah.
Super easy. It is way harder for me to walk into a new place and be like, "Hey, I'm Jason. Tell me about you."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's a different thing. But I often feel like, you kind of touched on a few things. I often feel like when, like, connection is something that, like, is a true thing. Like, if you're looking for a real connection, like, I think churches can be great at superficial connection of, like, oh, hey, I know you, I shake your hand, we talk about something, but we don't really talk about anything. And then we leave, and then we go about it like, oh, why aren't we best friends? And it's like, no, it's just kind of this other relationship. Like, I tend to want to be like, I'm like, let's get this small talk over with so we can talk about some real stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know? And, but I understand not everybody's like that. But in church, I think it is very easy to kind of just keep things really surface level. But I often feel like if I'm recognizing that I'm not connecting with somebody, I'm almost getting in the way of somebody that they will really connect with. You know what I mean? Like, where it's like, okay, like, I can pretend that I'm having, that we're getting along and this is all going great. Or I can go like, dude, it's totally okay that I have named 7 things that I'm into and you don't like any of them.
Yep.
And I don't even understand half the
we're
words
not going to be besties.
Right? It's okay. I can still love you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I, like, as a person, but maybe we're not going to be best friends, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. It's a hard thing to walk.
For sure.
But actually, it does kind of lead into our guest today.
Yeah, it does.
Our guest today is Erik Gaylo. He is with a group called Table Songs, and they are located in Chicago. I actually met Erik at the Innovators Conference, and he kind of pursued me afterwards. I ran into him in a couple places, and I was just like, man, I really like this kid. And a kid, you know, he's younger than me. He's a kid. So he, but anyway, we just kind of really connected. We started talking. I ended up having like a 2-hour-long phone conversation with him at one point, and it was just like, man, I love your heart. You know, he's been through a lot in church, as many of us have been. And he is building this beautiful community called Table Songs. And they've just started kind of recording some of the music that's already come out of it. But I think he has such a cool perspective of coming from a place, like, he comes from a place of hurt. And, you know, he shares that, and it's, you can tell, like, very few of us get out of church life or music ministry or honestly friendships or anything like completely unscathed, right? And so like he's kind of walking that experience and building something out of that. And I think it's really beautiful. It's very community focused, and they were just releasing some music. So I was like, man, get on here. Let's hear what you're doing.
Yeah.
So without further ado, Erik Gaylo from Table Songs.
Well, hey, I'm excited about what you're doing with Table Songs. Why don't you tell us a little bit right off the bat? Just kind of like, it's funny, like the name Table Songs just sounds attractive and inviting to me. Like, tell me what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so Table Songs is a ministry that came out of a young adult ministry here in Chicago. So to be able to talk about Table Songs, I need to kind of tell you a little bit of a story about just the table. So back in 2020, I moved to Chicago in beginning of 2020, right before the pandemic and all the fun that happened with that. And man, it was a lot. So the short version of that story, I was at a church in St. Louis, and just a lot of unfortunate things happened in St. Louis. I'll put it that way. I remember I walked through just a lot of church hurt, a lot of just ugly mess that the Lord, as time went on, was able to redeem in the beautiful ways that He does, But I landed in Chicago February 4th of 2020 with no job, a temporary place to live, and my life was kind of like in shambles, right? And then 3 weeks later, COVID hits, and everything gets turned upside down yet again. And man, I hadn't led worship. I should say rather, I had been leading worship for like about 15 years up to this point in my life. And in 2020, I took about a year and some change off, and I didn't touch a platform. I didn't really lead worship or do anything for a little over a year. And it was just so good for my soul. Because myself, probably like many other worship leaders out there, have wrestled a lot with identity, where like my role as a worship leader and a songwriter had become like my identity. And so in a lot of ways, the Lord kind of used COVID and the things that happened in my life in St. Louis to kind of allow me to kind of hit a reset point in my life to where I can look around and be like, all right, I am relearning what it means to find the joy of my salvation. I'm relearning what it means to just be Erik, a child of God, right? To be able to worship Him without the transactional element of having to stand on a stage and lead songs, So all of these beautiful things were kind of happening in 2020 as I kind of also went through a lot of therapy and counseling and pastoring and just rest, as I kind of walk through a lot of just hard things, right? And then during that, I believe the Lord used COVID for a number of reasons, or I should say in a number of ways around the globe for His church. One of them, at least here in Chicago, was to kind of show us that a lot of what we were calling community prior to COVID was really just a facade. A lot of us were kind of putting all of our roots in all the wrong places. And for the first time during COVID, you have all these people stuck at home in the four walls of their bedroom day after day with Jesus in the desert of their interior lives, trying to figure out what does it actually mean to follow Jesus? What does it actually mean to live in biblical community with one another? And how do we do this, right? And so one day I threw out an Instagram message to like 30 friends on Instagram. I said, hey, we're going to do dinner at my house on Friday. If anybody wants to come over and share a meal together and celebrate the goodness of God, let's go. And 8 friends showed up that first night. And there was no agenda aside from just coming together to celebrate the goodness of God and to enjoy the company of one another. And to, Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. When you come together in an intentional way to bless the heart of God and to love on one another, you create space for the Holy Spirit to do something really special. And that's really just what we were doing in my home. And so over the course of about a year, it quickly went from 8 people that first night to 50 something people in my house every month on a regular basis. And it was like the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, man. I don't know how we fed everybody half the time. And it was just beautiful. We were just doing community, and eventually moving the story along here, I ended up leaving the church that I was sitting at the time, and in community at, because a friend of mine was a pastor at another church in the area who needed some help, needed some interim help, right? And as I was there helping out, he was very kind. He was just like, "Hey, why don't you just hold dinners at the church instead of at your house?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, let's go." Right. And so for the first time, some friends created an Instagram account and, made a video and invited all these young adults, anyone between 18 to 35, to come to the table. Right. And I still remember that first table night that we held. About 130 young adults showed up in the basement of this EV Free Church in Elgin, Illinois, and it was the least sexiest thing you could imagine, bro. Right? But like, the
is worship supposed to be sexy? I mean, come on.
I mean, exactly, right? But
if it is, I feel like we've done something wrong.
You're not wrong, and thank you for pointing that out. I think that's good for us to acknowledge. But yeah, the Lord just showed up, and it was beautiful. We shared a meal together, we opened our Bibles together, and we worshiped together. And so quickly realized that the Lord was doing something here that we needed to figure out how to steward, and it just grew. So all that to say, we became a parachurch ministry, and over the following couple of years became the largest young adult ministry in Chicagoland. We've, by God's grace, touched the lives of thousands of 18 to 35-year-olds over the past few years. In that, this is where we kind of pivot into table songs. We had all these like young adults kind of showing up at the table, like asking all these questions about like, man, like how do I write songs with Jesus? How do then they'd start asking questions about like worship, like, hey, like how do I do this? Like, or how do I do that? Like, like it sounds like a simple, like silly question, but like, how do I bless the heart of God? I say this with love and with care, but like I live in Chicago, right? So the culture for worship in a lot of churches around Chicago is such to where if you're pretty and can play a G chord, we put you on stage. And in doing that, it's very dangerous on multiple levels, right? Because you're putting people, I'll loosely say kids, right, onto these platforms and celebrating their talent and their gifting without celebrating a process that the Lord wants to walk them through with Him, right? And fathering them through that, or mothering them through that. And so as a result, you have a lot of you got a lot of kids with guitars. You got a lot of folks who can like sing great songs, or like they have great voices, but like they don't really know who they are in the Lord, and who they are in their walk with Christ, and what their identity is. And so in all reality, they're just like leading songs without having the internal world with the Lord to be able to actually shepherd and lead the people outside of just executing songs, right? I think, having been a worship pastor for a long time now, and by God's grace, having led worship around the world, I've seen this kind of culture within worship ministry in the Western church kind of becoming more and more prevalent. In a lot of ways, I like to kind of, I don't like to say it, but it's kind of the way I feel like I have to articulate it. But there's almost like let's say a devaluing, or I feel like worship ministry in a lot of ways is almost kind of losing the holiness aspect of it, because we're becoming more and more transactional in the way that we're doing it, and less transformational in the way that we're doing it, right? So that's kind of, I know I kind of went down a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but as far as the overall arcing story of where did Table Songs come from, it came from a ministry called The Table that we were doing for young adults. And out of that came an internship. And then out of that internship came just community with a lot of worship leaders and churches around Chicago, to where last fall we recorded our first live EP together. It was a beautiful experience. Had a lot of friends, mutual friends of ours too, that were there for that, and just got to celebrate the goodness and kindness of the Lord. And we're at a spot now where we're starting to kind of share those songs in this season, as well as launching a number of other initiatives around Table Songs, things such as monthly community nights for worship leaders that are focused around just developing relationship and community. Senior pastors have a lot out there. Like I'm sure your senior pastor even has conferences and things that he goes to regularly that kind of fill his cup, right? And people that he calls to just support him in the work that he's doing. But worship guys and gals, like, we're kind of like, I say this kind of tongue in cheek here, but we're kind of like a commodity. It's like pastors and churches, like they can't live with us and they can't live without us, And so as a result, like, worship leaders tend to kind of have to be stuck in this routine of like, man, Sunday's always coming, and how do I get ready for the next week? How do I train these people up? How do I keep pouring out consistently, and not always getting poured back in? There's a very real need for reciprocal ministry when in ministry, and in particular worship ministry, right? So that's just kind of a need that we've been like seeing and just kind of wanting to be intentional about trying to serve. So starting this fall, we're going public with community nights here in Chicagoland for worship leaders, as well as this fall in September. You're actually going to get to be a part of this. I'm super excited. We're doing our first songwriter event through Table Songs here in Chicagoland, where we're just inviting songwriters from all over the Midwest to come together for a day. Jason, you're going to get to share a bit. I'm excited for that.
We'll see how it is. Don't get too excited. You don't know what I'm going to say.
It could be a loose cannon. Who knows? But I believe the Lord's going to do something beautiful through you. So I'm excited for that. But I'm excited just to see how the Lord just kind of breaks down walls through this event with different houses and people, to be able to just come together as the capital C Church and to just celebrate the community of songwriters that he's placed here in Chicago, and to, the heart behind it is less about like, hey, like we want to write a double word song out of this, but more so like, how do I like, oh, hey, Betty over here in Palatine writes, songs with Jesus. Oh, I didn't know that. That's great. And I get to like meet her and become friends, or like, John Doe over here in Arlington Heights or wherever, we get to come together and celebrate first the goodness of God, but also each other and the gifts that the Lord has placed in each of us, but also just build relationships together, right? This idea of the capital C Church coming together to write songs for the church and not just for like a specific house. Yeah. I'm sure you've seen a lot of this too. Like a lot of times you have like every church now is like starting a worship band and like writing records, and it's like the thing, so like instead of like just thinking about like, hey, I'm writing a song like for my house, right? It becomes like a branded thing, what does it look like to just come together as people to just celebrate the goodness and kindness of God in our lives, and to write songs together that first bless the heart of God and then encourage one another as the holistic church, right? Yeah. Versus a particular brand. So anyway, just lots of stuff kind of coming up here as we go into the fall with all this stuff. So thanks for asking and letting me kind of unpack that.
Well, so there's a lot of things I could grab from there, but I want to, you used a term a number of times, and I'd like for you to kind of unpack this a little more. So you were saying like, you feel like there's a lot of scenarios where worship is transactional rather than transformational. Like, what do you mean by that? What are you saying? What has been well, let me ask you this. What has been your experience that gives you those words to put to it?
Totally. So I worked for a mega church organization for about 8 years. And in such environment, by God's grace, I was able to uh, kind of have access to a lot of mentors, right? And some development and growing through that, which was a gift. But aside from that, I think the thing that kind of brought about this idea of transformational versus transactional uh, was this idea that too often churches will look at a worship guy or a worship gal as almost like a means to an end, right? Now, this may not be a popular opinion, but hear me out. Uh, you have a lot of these young guys and gals coming out of Liberty or whatever school you want to name, and they're set up with this expectation of, oh, hey, I'm going to be like so and so on such and such big major band, and all I'm going to do is like, write songs and sit in the studio and play music on Sundays, right? Um, and that's a whole nother conversation talking about expectations in like Christian academia. But my tie into the local church and like how it becomes transactional is that churches and pastors a lot of times will look at like a young guy coming out of these schools and be like, oh, hey, I can get this guy for X amount of dollars. He looks the part, he sounds the part. I don't really need him to like pastor or to like run things. I just need him to like, you know, I'll use the term here and say music monkey, even though I haven't heard a pastor use that term, but the my observations have kind of come to that, right? To where like, hey, we just need you to like get up on stage, run the tracks, and lead the songs, right? And we'll pay you X amount of dollars to do that. And then, a lot of times they forget the fact that like when you hire someone into a pastoral role or a ministry role, like you're also taking on the responsibility yourself as a leader to pastor them, right? So you're getting like the transaction of this person using their skill set for the kingdom of God without having the internal relationship with Jesus and the community or pastoral staff or whatever have you. That is the transformational aspect of the individual, right? And so we're putting more and more of an emphasis on the execution and the tactical of a worship leader than we are on the fact that like this person who is executing these things is first and foremost a child of God. And how are we like continuing to like do life and community together to where we are like becoming more like Christ together, right? And so you look at the gigging culture that is kind of here in America with like worship leaders. I would venture to say probably half my friends who are worship leaders aren't even on staff at churches. They're just contractors who just go out and lead places, right? And so that's all well and good, but like if there isn't a culture that's being like intentionally developed in the local church to be like, hey, we want to like value the creative and what they're bringing to the body of Christ, but also value the individual as a child of God, we're kind of missing the point, but again, going back to the comment I made earlier, kind of tongue in cheek about like, worship leaders just kind of being a commodity that like churches and pastors can't live with us or live without us. As much as it's kind of funny, it's also kind of true. But like, my thought and my question or even challenge would be like, how do we pivot from this? How do we get here? Right. And then how do we pivot from this? Because clearly what's the fruit from this? Well, the fruit is you got a lot of worship leaders out there that like don't know who they are. They're lacking an identity. Right. And then you're getting a lot of worship leaders who are being disenfranchised because they're going into ministry or vocational ministry, having been set up a certain way with expectations from Christian academia, right? And then, when it comes time and they hit the field work for real, it's like, oh man, like being a worship pastor means more than just, setting up Ableton. I actually have to like go sit across the table from somebody whose life has fallen apart, you know? Oh, hey, maybe I'm not actually going to get a job that pays me 80 grand a year at a big church. I'm going to be working at like this church of 250 people in Albuquerque, like having to wear like 5 different hats to be able to just make a paycheck, doing the work of the Lord, or, then you got the whole other group of folks who are just like, they're bivocational, or volunteer, but like, how do we move away from this idea of thinking about worship leaders as a commodity that just kind of fit into the machine, if you will, of the church and the operations of the church, to actually remembering that they're God's kids, and we need to be stewarding those relationships in a way beyond just what they can do to execute for the church. I think that would be kind of my thought.
Yeah. So I think that's really well said. I mean, I think your experience is very common to a lot. It's interesting, the conversations that I get in online and stuff. And it's funny because it's not all that way,
Right.
It's certain streams that lives in. And it's, I always try and encourage folks like, hey, if you feel this way, there's probably a reason you feel this way. And it's like, by trying to live within this machine, you're not going to see a difference. Like, you're not going to change the machine. Right.
Right.
So the move is to figure out something else to do. But the good news is that there are other things to do, that you don't have to be that, a lot of times we tend to like be certain, we take words like servant hearted and like, you need to be humble and all this, like, yes, that's true.
Yes.
But it's all, if you feel something in your soul that you're like, this just isn't right. Like if you're walking with the Lord, if you're listening to the Spirit and you're feeling like, this isn't great, like there's probably a reason for that. Right. So
Right.
So tell me how Table Songs is different. Like you're saying like, okay, Table Songs is kind of grown out of this, it's very, I think anytime you're trying to make changes or anytime you're coming from a place of hurt, right? It's easy to want to run away from something, but you actually need to run towards something and call people to something, right? So tell me like how Table Songs is calling us to something different, and how that's like practically working out as you've been stepping into it.
Totally, man. Thank you for asking that. So that's a fair question. I think let me start with this statement and then I'll try to unpack it. I think the biggest thing that kind of separates Table Songs apart from a lot of worship ministries is the fact that it's focused on the people more than the product, right? I think, at least from the vantage point that I've had over the years, I've watched a lot of worship ministries, some big ones even that have risen and since fallen, kind of start in this place of like, hey, you want to write songs for our church? And that's great. That's beautiful. But then somewhere along the way, a record deal happens. They get signed to some company. And then they start doing all these other things. And then they start kind of like forgetting the people that are in it, and their identity kind of shifts from being like, hey, like we're here to serve the people that God's placed in front of us. We're here to write songs for the people that are here in front of us that first bless the heart of God, right? We're here to love the people well, right? To then becoming like, oh, hey, we want to put you on tour with Bethel, but like XYZ needs to happen, and you need to do, 1, 2, 3 to be able to pivot to get there, right? I've seen this happen on a number of occasions. Right now, I'm not saying any of this in a knock towards Bethel or anybody whatsoever or any companies, but I think what I'm trying to address here is more so the fact that you have regular, everyday human beings who have been gifted by God to write songs and to lead worship, who go from having this mindset of like, hey, I'm here to just steward what's in front of me and the people in front of me, to all right, how do I, go out and gain ground versus the Lord giving you ground to steward, right? And in that, when you start looking at like the products of what you're producing and gaining more ground, and making that like your objective or your metric, like you forget about God's metric, which is first, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? So all these things are like with industry and labels and records, and all this stuff is great. Like I'm not knocking in any way, shape, or form any of that. But I think what sets effectiveness apart in this arena is first knowing your identity as a child of God, and why you do what you do, and even how you do what you do, right? Know your limits, to then be able to then look at these tools and be like, all right, this is a way that we can continue to, bless the heart of God and steward the songs, like as a songwriter, like, man, this, like, there's probably, I don't even know how many songs that'll never see the light of day that I've written. And then like, there's an even smaller amount of songs that like I probably shared in like a church service or a worship service. And then there's even a smaller amount of songs that's ever made it on a record. Right. And there's even a smaller amount of songs that will go beyond just a record, So like, when you're thinking about like, the songs, like I think of this song that we're doing right now, like this song Even Now that's coming out here in August. Like I wrote that song in 2020. I've been sitting on it for like 3 years. I didn't show it anywhere publicly until one night at a table night. I pulled it out in the basement of this church, and a room of 100 young adults sang it like they've been singing it for 100 years, and it was beautiful. And the Lord breathed on it. And he did something sweet with it, right? It was less about like, oh, hey, like we're going to try to make this song happen. We're going to make something happen to be able to like get on like a radio station or a playlist somewhere, or to think we're the greatest thing, but just like, all right, well, what are we doing to first bless the heart of God with our songs, right? But then like as the song has kind of like we've gone down the road carrying this song, right? The Lord has just kind of breathed on it. And there's been loads of people around our community and loads of people around Chicagoland and even parts of the country that have like kind of picked it up in different ways, that have shown evidence of God being like, hey, this song blesses my heart, and I want you to share this with people because it's helpful, right? Versus other songs where God's like, hey, I really love this, but let's keep this one here, right, between you and I, but then like when you have the song, this is our song, right? I think of like a Taylor Swift song. Isn't that like our song is a right? I'm not gonna go into a Taylor Swift conversation. But talking about like the tools of what's out there in the worship world, like right now, like we're talking about, playlist pitching and distribution and all these tools that are good and healthy tools in the right context, in the right way. But like, you can't, a lot of times I've watched artists and worship bands or groups kind of take a song that they wrote that may be a good song, but then like kind of use marketing tools and playlists in the industry of worship out there to kind of almost manufacture a move of God with it, versus having then also watch songs like, I think of the song Greater You Lord, right? That like kind of made an impact on the global church. This is a song that David Leonard and Matt Redman and a few other people wrote. And like, I remember David Leonard told me once, like, yeah, I didn't think that song was going to go anywhere. Like, we just kind of wrote that song and I wasn't really thrilled with it. And then like, it ended up on the record, and it ended up like making an impact on the church in a way that was very profound, so like when God decides like he wants to breathe on something, like just watch him do it, kind of follow the Lord. And when he's saying like, hey, I'm saying yes to this song. Now like, let's walk together and steward this song together. So what does stewarding a song together with the Lord look like? It could look like any number of things, right? For us right now, like I think of the song Even Now, like, well, we got to get good distribution for it. We got to, we feel permission to be able to go out and do some playlist pitching. And just let the Lord take it where it wants to go. But it didn't start there, I guess, is ultimately what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah. Well, and also you're really talking about there's something really distinct about the difference of like going out and trying to grab the ground, right, versus letting God give you the ground.
Yes.
And like I think in our culture, especially, like, there's like, it's like enterprise. It's like, well, no, like stewardship is growth, right? Like
Yes.
stewardship is growth. Like that's what it means. It means,
Yes.
oh, okay, this door opens, like, and we ask ourselves, and I've been trying so hard to learn this thing. Like, don't just ask like I shouldn't answer a question of something, hey, can you do this? It's not a question of can I, it's a question of should I, right?
Yes, I
and
love
just
that.
because it's there doesn't mean that that's necessarily something that
Yes,
you
100%.
just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And so
Yes.
trying to learn how to steward that and kind of walk through in that slowly, and I think it's really cool. I think the heart behind what you're saying is awesome.
Thanks, man.
So here, like, let me ask you this question. What are your hopes? So you've now taken the song, you've recorded the song Even Now, right? You're like, hey, we feel like God's breathing on this one. Like we're human. We have hopes for things. Like, how would you hope? Let me ask you this. How would you hope people hear the song Even Now? Like, from the standpoint of like what context do you want them to put around that song that gives them a sense of like, yeah, I hope this has a place in your life.
Yeah. This song in particular is a special one to me. I got to be a part of this one. And when I wrote it with my friend Caleb, he and I were both in this really, really broken places in our lives. Like, he had just gone through a messy breakup that had broken his heart. I had gone through something very similar in my life at the time. We both were kind of walking through a lot of broken expectations, right? And then right in the midst of that, like, was COVID happening around us, and lockdown and all that. So for us, it was just, trying to come to a place of reminding ourselves of who God is. There's a verse in scripture where David says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not his benefits," right? And I think it's Psalm 103, right? This idea that, like, David in this verse is like preaching the gospel to himself and remembering the Lord, reminding himself of all these attributes of God, and why he's worthy to be worshiped, regardless of how he might be feeling in that moment, and so I remember kind of going into that right the night before, and I said to a friend, I was like, hey, I think God's got something special with this one. Because I had the lines for like the first part of the chorus of Even Now kind of in my head, but I didn't have a melody to it yet. But I still remember the call that I had, because Caleb and I did a write over a FaceTime call, kind of like this. And he was in Nashville and I was in Chicago, and the Spirit of the Lord just fell in a way that was so profound on the call that like we're two dudes and we're bawling our eyes out here over a FaceTime call in a way, because the Spirit of the Lord is just doing a work in the mess of our hearts as we're writing this song. Even now you're good. I still believe you're faithful. I know that you're still holy, even now. And like, to be able to say that, like, requires a release of self, and turning your eyes to the Lord, right? You can look at what's going on around you, or you can look at Jesus, right? Then we get to the bridge of the song where it's like, even if I never see all the things I wish would be, I'll sing your praise. Man, one of my favorite songs as a kid was this song, "Blessed Be Your Name" by Matt Redman, right? Like, classic, right? There's a line and it says, "You give and take away, you give and take away. My heart will choose to say, blessed be your name," right? And I was like, I remember like sitting in that call with Caleb and be like, man, I want to say that, like, just in a different way. What is it like, Lord? I want to choose to say that regardless of what my circumstances like look like, I still want to praise you, because this is my offering. This is my choice right now to choose you over my circumstances. This is what is the sweet aroma that blesses the heart of God, right? And so when I think of people hearing this song and using this song or singing this song, like, you know, I just want people to just remember the Lord. Like, again, going back to that verse from David, like, bless the Lord, oh my soul, and forget not his benefits, right? It's this idea of choosing to just first like bless the heart of God, and then through that remember who he is, and then just continue to say thank you. Lord, even if the things around me don't look good, even if the things around me like are falling apart, even now in the midst of this, you are good. And
Right.
I'm going to choose to look to you.
I love that because it puts the emphasis on the moment rather than on some like, thing for the future. Like, oh, you'll do this, like I think a lot of times like our songs kind of tend to like, we want them to give us hope, right? That's important.
Right.
We want our songs to give us hope. And so we hope for this thing in the future and we sing about that thing in the future. And it's like,
right.
Well, God is still good now. Like, what does that even mean? How do I wrestle with that in my faith and as a person? And so like, I think giving those words, I love those words. And man, I just love what you're doing. I think it's really awesome that you're just taking a step back and looking at your experience and trying to say like, hey, this isn't working and I want to do something different, and actually like trying to nurture those around you and try and create something compelling and like come to the table, come to the table and sing these songs, because that alone is healing, right? God's hand in that is healing, and us being together is healing. And so I just think it's I'm excited to see where it goes. And you know what, man? If it doesn't go outside the walls of those people that you're with now, like it's amazing. But
I love that.
But I often think like there's more people that need that message. And so I just thank you so much for being faithful to do that. And thanks for joining us.
Dude, thank you for having me and just for celebrating what the Lord's doing here, man. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, after that interview, you can really tell that he's still working through some stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's a journey, man. Like I think anytime that you are like, you grieve, right? Like when you've been hurt by something or when you've gone through, you learn from it. But so many people just peace out. Like the response is kind of like, well, I guess I'm out on God, or I'm out on church, or I'm out on whatever, because it's like the amount of stories that I hear about that, like, well, I just couldn't buy into this anymore. It's like, well, I don't know if that's the answer. Like, I think Jesus wants to heal you. Like Jesus wants to do things in you,
What were you in it for the first place if you're not buying into it? Like, because it's like church is a beautiful gathering and of like-minded people and a beautiful place where we get to, be together. Like we are the church, but in the end, it's still like you and the Lord. Like it's your relationship with the Lord. Right. And out of those experiences, like, yes, like he walks us through that healing. Yeah. It's an invitation to step, almost like how in the beginning we were talking about intimate relationships with friends. Like I think these kinds of moments actually invite us into a deeper relationship with the Lord, of different areas of intimacy that you haven't had before.
Right. Yeah. It's like, what does God want to do, in this moment, and it's like, it's interesting. My wife and I will talk about how when we were first getting married, like we really were intentional about, we want our marriage to be a marriage of three. We want God at the center of it, and I have to recognize that I can't get everything that I need from my wife. Allie is wonderful. She's amazing. I love her to death. We've been married for 20 years. She is like my perfect person, but she's still not everything that I need. And I'm not everything that she needs, And so it's when we invite God into those relationships, and it's cool then when what we do in our community becomes an outgrowth of what that is, rather than counting on our community to be that for us. Right. It's like, well, no, we're still all people.
Yeah.
Like I'm definitely an idiot. Like Christina will attest.
Definitely an idiot.
I'm definitely an idiot sometimes. There's Allie, and Allie has this, she used to like want to have a sign with her. Like we'd go to parties or whatever. She's like, sometimes I just want to like have a sign that's like, his opinions do not reflect the opinions of this marriage.
That's hilarious. Oh man. But be sure to check out the songs that from Table Songs.
Yeah, so check out Even Now. It's going to be on streaming platforms on August 4th. And then I think there's more on the way. So I'm excited. Erik and I have talked a lot about how, there's kind of this industry machine that works, right? And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with that idea, but at the same time, we don't know how to move beyond it. And I think, and this is kind of even having Erik on this podcast, it's like, I think we all just need to be big fans of each other. Like, I need to stop just only talking about the thing that I want to do and start talking about the things my friends are doing with the same enthusiasm that I'm excited about my thing, right?
Yep.
Like, that's how we build community in the music world. That's how we start like branching out from just kind of being consumers all the time. So I'm a fan of Table Songs. I love what they're doing. Happy to have them on the podcast. And they're writing some pretty good songs.
Yes. And I'm a fan of Worship Artistry. So if you haven't already, please head over to worshipartistry.com and start a free trial. You get 21 days free and you get access to over 600 worship lessons and skill building lessons and a whole lot more for you or your whole team, whatever you want. So be sure to do that and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.